Hey there, welcome to Mr. Cozy True Crime Stories. Tonight, we're diving into 2 hours of gripping true crime cases. Real stories of mystery, betrayal, and cold-blooded crimes, all set against the soothing backdrop of rain. It's the perfect blend of calm and unsettling. If these cases draw you in, tap that like button, share with your fellow true crime lovers, and subscribe to join our curious community. I'm always wondering, where are you tuning in from? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. Now settle in, and let's dig into the darkness. Story 1. The October morning air in Westminster, Colorado carried the first whispers of autumn, crisp and cool against the skin. It was the kind of morning that promised a beautiful Friday, where children would walk to school bundled in light jackets, their breath forming small clouds in the early air. For 10-year-old Jessica Ridgway, this particular Friday morning, October 5th, 2012, should have been unremarkable, another ordinary day in her young life filled with fifth-grade lessons, time with friends, and the simple joys of childhood. Instead, it would become the day that shattered a community and transformed a neighborhood into a landscape of fear and heartbreak. Jessica was a vibrant child, the kind of girl who filled rooms with energy and laughter. Her favorite color was purple, a preference so strong that it seemed to reflect something essential about her personality, bold, bright, impossible to ignore. She loved to ride her scooter through the neighborhood parks, the wind catching her hair as she glided along the pathways. She walked her dog with the kind of patience and care that spoke to a gentle heart. She practiced cheerleading routines with her friends, her enthusiasm infectious, her smile wide and genuine. To those who knew her, Jessica embodied the best of childhood: curiosity, joy, and an openness to the world that assumed safety and kindness from those around her. That Friday morning, Jessica began her walk from her home in Westminster to Witt Elementary School, just as she had done countless times before. The route was familiar, the kind of short journey that parents in quiet neighborhoods allowed their children to make, a small step toward independence. Her mother, who worked nights and often slept during the morning hours, trusted that her daughter would arrive safely at school, as she always had. There was no reason to believe this day would be any different from all the others. But Jessica never arrived at school. Hours passed, and when the afternoon came, school officials contacted Jessica's mother with news that sent ice through every parent's veins. Jessica had been marked absent. She had never walked through the school doors that morning. The mother, suddenly and terribly awake to a nightmare she couldn't yet fully comprehend, immediately notified law enforcement. Within hours, what had begun as a beautiful autumn morning transformed into the opening chapter of every community's worst fear. The search for Jessica Ridgway began that afternoon and would stretch across 17 agonizing days. Westminster police mobilized quickly, understanding that in cases of missing children, time is the enemy. Every hour that passes reduces the chances of a safe recovery. Investigators canvassed neighborhoods, knocking on doors, showing Jessica's photograph, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual that morning. They collected DNA samples from residents, gathering over 700 samples in an effort to eliminate potential suspects and narrow their search. The community responded with the kind of unity that emerges in crisis, with hundreds of volunteers joining search parties, combing through open spaces, parks, and wooded areas. Jessica's parents appeared before television cameras, their faces etched with a terror that no parent should ever have to experience. They made tearful pleas for information, for anyone who might have seen their daughter, for the safe return of their little girl. The mother spoke of knowing immediately that something was wrong, that maternal instinct that transcends logic and operates on a frequency of pure fear. The entire community seemed to hold its breath, hoping against hope that Jessica would be found safe, that this story would have the ending everyone desperately wanted. On October 7th, just 2 days after Jessica's disappearance, a discovery was made that gave investigators their first concrete lead. Jessica's backpack was found in a residential area of Superior, Colorado, some 6 miles from her home. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation analyzed the backpack for DNA evidence, while police collected comparison samples from Jessica's home. The discovery of the backpack, while providing crucial evidence, also deepened the community's dread. If Jessica's backpack had been discarded miles from where she disappeared, what did that mean for Jessica herself? The answer came 3 days later, on October 10th, in a discovery so horrific that it would haunt the community for years to come. Workers in Arvada, at Pat Ridge Park along Highway 93, found human remains in a trash bag. When investigators arrived and examined what had been found, they made a discovery that defied comprehension. The body had been dismembered. For several days, authorities worked to identify the remains, a process complicated by the condition of the body. On October 12th, the Jefferson County coroner confirmed what everyone had feared but hoped against. The remains were those of Jessica Ridgway. The confirmation of Jessica's death sent shockwaves through Westminster and the surrounding communities. This was not supposed to happen here, in this quiet suburban area where families raised their children and felt safe. The nature of the crime, the dismemberment of a child, suggested a perpetrator of unusual brutality and depravity. Parents who had once allowed their children to walk to school now drove them, their trust in the safety of their neighborhoods shattered. Schools went into heightened security mode. The community existed in a state of collective trauma and fear, knowing that someone capable of such an act was still out there, unknown and unpredictable. On October 10th, police made a point of publicly ruling out Jessica's parents as suspects, making clear that they believed Jessica had been abducted by an unknown person. The FBI released a suspect behavior profile, hoping that someone might recognize patterns or behaviors that could lead to the killer. Investigators worked around the clock, following leads, analyzing evidence, and building what they hoped would be a case that would bring Jessica's killer to justice. Then on October 19th, a tip came into the police hotline that would change everything. A neighbor called to report information about a 17-year-old local resident named Austin Reed Sigg. The caller noted that Sigg wore a cross similar to one police believed the killer had worn. More troubling, the neighbor reported that Sigg had an unusual fascination with death. 2 FBI agents were dispatched to collect a DNA sample from Sigg, who lived in Westminster, not far from where Jessica had been taken. What happened next was perhaps the most unexpected turn in the entire investigation. On the evening of October 23, 2012, the Westminster Police Department received a phone call that no one could have anticipated. On the other end of the line was a woman's voice, shaking with emotion, delivering words that would later be played in a courtroom. "My son wants to turn himself in for the Jessica Ridgway murder." The caller was Mindy Sigg, Austin's mother, and she was about to make a decision that would tear her own life apart while potentially saving others. In the recorded call that followed, a young male voice came on the line, calm and unervingly composed. "I murdered Jessica Ridgway," Austin Sigg said. "I have proof that I did. I'm giving myself up completely. There will be no resistance whatsoever." Police immediately went to the Sigg home in Westminster and arrested the 17-year-old without incident. When officers searched his residence, they found evidence that corroborated his confession, including remains from Jessica's body that Sigg had kept in the crawl space of his home. As investigators questioned Sigg and pieced together the evidence, the full horror of what had happened to Jessica emerged. In a recorded police interview, Sigg described how he had driven around on the morning of October 5th, looking for a victim. He claimed that Jessica was not specifically targeted. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was a random place, random time. Random everything, he stated with chilling detachment. He had lain in wait as Jessica walked past on her way to school. When she came near his vehicle, he abducted her, restraining her with zip ties and rope, binding her wrists and ankles. He drove her back to his home, where no one else was present. What Sigg did to Jessica in those hours is almost unbearable to recount. He assaulted the 10-year-old child. Then he strangled her to death. But his crimes did not end with murder. In an act of grotesque brutality, Sigg dismembered Jessica's body. He placed some of her remains in the crawl space of his home and put her torso in a trash bag, which he then left in Patridge Park, where it would be discovered days later. The investigation also revealed that this was not Sig's first violent crime. On May 28, 2012, months before Jessica's murder, Sig had attempted to kidnap a 22-year-old female jogger near Kettner Lake. The woman had been running on a trail when someone tried to grab her from behind. She had managed to escape, and the case had remained unsolved until Sig confessed to this crime as well. As the community struggled to process the arrest and the horrifying details that were emerging, attention turned to Austin Sig himself and the inevitable questions. Who was this teenager, and how had he become capable of such monstrous acts? Sig had been a student at a local high school, but had dropped out during his junior year to obtain his GED. At the time of his arrest, he was enrolled at a community college, pursuing a career as a mortician. His mother would later reveal that her son had been bullied for the sound of his voice, though he had never told her about it at the time. She described them as having been very close, which made his secret life of violent fantasy and criminal behavior all the more incomprehensible. Mindy Sig's decision to turn in her own son presented an almost impossible moral dilemma. She was confronted with evidence that her child, the boy she had raised, loved, and protected, was responsible for one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. She would later testify that Austin's upbringing had not contributed to his crimes, asserting that he had not experienced abuse as a child. She attended every hearing in her son's case, often supported by family and friends, driven by a need to understand what had happened and to face the consequences of her son's actions. In later interviews, she would emphasize that nothing she had done had caused this, that she couldn't understand how or why her son had committed these terrible acts. On October 30th, 2012, Austin Sig was formally charged as an adult on 17 counts. 11 of these related to Jessica Ridgway's murder and included first-degree murder after deliberation, second-degree kidnapping, felony murder, and robbery. The remaining 6 counts related to the May 28th attempted kidnapping and included charges of first-degree murder, attempted assault, and attempted kidnapping. Investigators had also discovered child abuse material during their investigation, leading to additional charges of child sexual exploitation. Despite having no prior criminal history, the evidence against Sig was overwhelming. He had confessed not only on the phone call, but also in detailed police interviews. His DNA matched evidence collected at the scenes. Physical evidence from Jessica had been found in his home. The prosecution had what they called a strong case. Yet Sig initially pleaded not guilty, and the legal proceedings moved forward. Then, on October 1st, 2013, nearly a year after Jessica's murder, Austin Sig made a decision that surprised many in the courtroom. Against the advice of his legal counsel, he appeared before Jefferson County District Court Judge Stephen Munsinger and changed his plea to guilty. He confessed in open court and pleaded guilty to a total of 15 charges, including first-degree murder, assault of a minor, kidnapping, attempted kidnapping, and exploitation of a minor. He also formally confessed to being the perpetrator of the May 28, 2012, attempted kidnapping of the jogger. On November 19, 2013, Judge Munsinger sentenced Austin Sig. Because Sig had been 17 at the time of Jessica's death, he was not eligible for the death penalty. Instead, Munsinger sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. But the judge did not stop there. Understanding the magnitude of Sig's crimes and the need to ensure he would never again be free to harm anyone, Munsinger ordered that Sig serve an additional 86 years once he became eligible for parole. Sig's legal counsel attempted to argue that the sentence was cruel and unusual punishment, but Judge Munsinger dismissed their arguments. "This case cries out for a life sentence," the judge stated, his words capturing the sentiment of a community that had been devastated by Sig's crimes. In June 2014, Sig was moved to an undisclosed out-of-state prison, a decision made to preserve both his safety and the privacy and safety of the Ridgway family. He effectively disappeared from Colorado, removed to serve his sentence far from the community he had traumatized. For Westminster, the healing process was slow and painful. The community had been rocked to its core by Jessica's murder. The randomness of the crime, the fact that Jessica had simply been a child walking to school, doing exactly what countless other children did every day, made it all the more terrifying. But in the midst of grief and fear, the community also demonstrated remarkable resilience and compassion. They rallied around Jessica's family with support, love, prayers, meals, and whatever else was needed to help them begin their healing journey. In partnership with Jessica's family, friends, and the broader community, the city of Westminster decided to honor Jessica's memory in a lasting way. They dedicated a park near her home as the Jessica Ridgway Memorial Park. The community came together to make the park special and commemorative of the vibrant child who had been taken from them. Jessica's favorite color, purple, was incorporated lovingly and generously throughout the space. The park features play equipment and landscaping that reflect the joy Jessica had found in simple pleasures. Riding her scooter, walking her dog, playing with friends, practicing cheerleading routines. Funds for the park were raised by the Westminster Legacy Foundation, and dozens of volunteers helped build and install the new equipment and work on the landscaping. On October 5, 2013, exactly 1 year after Jessica's disappearance, the Jessica Ridgway Memorial Park was dedicated. It stands now as an enduring memorial to her lively spirit and as a peaceful space for healing. The park, located at 10765 Moore Street in Westminster, serves a dual purpose. It is a place where children can play and families can gather, experiencing the kind of exuberant fun and joy that Jessica herself embraced, and it is also a place of remembrance and reflection. Each year, hundreds of children and adults use the park, keeping Jessica's memory alive and ensuring that her brief life continues to have meaning and impact. The case of Jessica Ridgway is more than a story of crime and punishment. It is a story about the fragility of innocence, about the randomness of violence, and about the terrible choices that some individuals make that ripple out to destroy not only their victims but entire communities. It is also a story about the impossible moral dilemmas faced by those who love people who commit terrible acts, exemplified by Mindy Sigg's agonizing decision to turn in her own son. And ultimately, it is a story about resilience, about communities that refuse to let violence define them, who choose instead to remember and honor the victims, to create beauty and meaning from tragedy. Jessica Ridgway lived for only 10 years, but her impact on Westminster and on all who knew her story extends far beyond those years. She is remembered not primarily as a victim, but as a vibrant, joyful child who loved purple and scooters and dogs and friends. Her memory lives on in a park filled with children's laughter, in a community that came together in the face of horror, and in the determination of countless parents to protect their children while still allowing them to experience the freedom and joy of childhood. The tragedy of what happened to Jessica can never be undone, but the response to that tragedy, the love, the memorial, the commitment to remember, stands as a testament to the enduring human capacity to find light even in the darkest circumstances. Story 2. The night of April 19, 2023, unfurled across the high plains of Colorado like a dark, star-dusted banner. Along the sprawling suburban corridors west of Denver, headlights cut lonely paths through the cool spring air. For 20-year-old Alexa Bartell, the ribbon of road ahead was a familiar one. She was driving her cheerful yellow Chevrolet Spark, a car as bright and full of life as she was, heading north on Indiana Street, a stretch of pavement that bordered the vast, silent expanse of the Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge. She was on her way home to Arvada after visiting a friend, the familiar comfort of her destination just a few miles away. The soft glow of her phone illuminated her face as she chatted with her girlfriend, Jenna Griggs, their voices a small bubble of warmth and connection in the quiet solitude of the drive. The conversation was easy, the kind shared between two people who know the rhythm of each other's thoughts. It was just after 10:40 p.m., Alexa Bartell was a young woman who moved through the world with a particular kind of light. A colorful light, a force of compassion and spontaneous joy. She was the kind of person who insisted on holding doors for strangers, who encouraged her mother to help those in need, who prayed for people she didn't know. She was a daughter, a niece, a friend, the sun in the small universe of those who loved her. In that moment, driving through the dark, her world was full of promise, the future a landscape of infinite possibility. As she drove, another vehicle was prowling the same dark roads. It was a gray Chevrolet Silverado, and inside, 3 young men, all just 18 years old, were hunting for trouble. The driver was Joseph Koenig, with his close friend Nicholas Mitch Karolchik beside him and a newer acquaintance, Zachary Kwok, in the back. They had spent part of the evening at a Walmart, loading the bed of Koenig's truck with large, heavy landscaping rocks, stones intended for garden beds and retaining walls, not for the grim purpose they had in mind. A fourth friend, who had been with them earlier, had felt a prickle of unease as the rocks were being loaded. When asked what they were for, he received no clear answer. He asked to be taken home, a decision that would spare him from the horror that was about to unfold. The Silverado became a vessel of random, malicious violence. They started their spree around 10 p.m. in Westminster, targeting cars with a casual cruelty that was as chilling as it was senseless. Their method was brutally simple. Koenig would speed up as they approached an unsuspecting vehicle traveling in the opposite direction. Then, one or more of them would heave a rock shot-put style out the window, a heavy missile aimed at the fleeting shape of another human being encased in metal and glass. They hit car after car. For Eleanor Davis, Nathan Tipton, and Brian Smith, the night was shattered by the sudden explosion of their windshields, a terrifying, inexplicable assault that left them shaken and stunned. They were the lucky ones. They were alive. As Alexa Bartell chatted on the phone, her yellow car came into the Silverado's view. Koenig accelerated. In the passenger seat, his arms swung out into the rushing darkness. A 9-pound rock, a piece of the Earth's crust, flew through the night. It met Alexa's windshield with catastrophic force. The glass didn't just crack, it disintegrated. The rock smashed through the driver's side window and struck Alexa in the head. On the other end of the phone line, Jenna Griggs heard a sound, and then nothing. The line didn't disconnect, but the voice she loved, the voice that was the soundtrack to her life, was gone. A terrifying, absolute silence had replaced it. Panic flared in Jenna's chest. She called out Alexa's name, again and again, but there was no response. The open line was a dead channel, a portal to an unknown horror. Fear gave way to a desperate need for action. Jenna opened the Find My iPhone app, her fingers trembling as she watched the small icon representing Alexa's car. It was stopped. It wasn't moving. Without a second thought, she got in her own car and drove, racing toward the static dot on the screen, praying for an explanation that wasn't the one her heart already knew. Inside the Silverado, the aftermath was a chaotic mix of adrenaline and a dawning, monstrous realization. Kwok and Karolchik heard the sickening thud as the rock hit its target. They saw the yellow car swerve off the road and come to a stop in a nearby field. Koenig seemed excited, even exultant, about the direct hit. There was concern in the car, a flicker of fear, but it was a selfish fear. There was concern in the car, but I couldn't tell you if it was mostly for self or for her, Kwok admit. Not one of them reached for a phone to call 911. The thought of getting in trouble was a more powerful deterrent than the possibility that they had just killed someone. Their next action would reveal a level of depravity. Instead of fleeing, they turned the truck around. They drove back to the scene of the crash, the place where Alexa Bartell lay dying. They didn't go back to help. They went back to look. And then one of them, it was never definitively established who, raised a phone and took a picture of the wrecked Chevrolet Spark in the field. It was a memento photo, a souvenir of their night of destruction. Having documented their work, they drove away into the darkness, leaving Alexa to die alone. When Jenna Griggs arrived at the scene, the sight that met her was every person's worst nightmare. The cheerful yellow car was a wreck, its windshield a gaping maw. Inside, Alexa was gravely injured, unresponsive. Jenna's world collapsed. She made 2 frantic phone calls. The first was to 911. The second was to Kelly Bartell. The words she spoke to Alexa's mother are the words no parent should ever have to hear. Your daughter has been in a crash. It's bad. You need to come now. First responders descended on the quiet stretch of Indiana Street, their flashing lights painting the scene in strobes of red and blue. Paramedic Nicole Bergeron had been a first responder for 2 decades, but nothing could have prepared her for what she found in the driver's seat of the yellow car. It was immediately clear that Alexa's injuries were catastrophic. Medical personnel pronounced her dead at the scene. The random act of violence had claimed its final, fatal victim. The investigation began immediately, spearheaded by the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. This wasn't just a hit and run, it was a homicide. The reports from the other drivers who had been attacked that night created a chilling timeline, a trail of terror that led directly to the spot where Alexa Bartell's life had ended. Investigators were looking for a group of people in a single vehicle, engaged in what they would come to call a rock-throwing spree. The crucial break in the case came not from an eyewitness, but from the silent, digital breadcrumbs the perpetrators had left behind. In the days following the murder, a friend and former co-worker of the 3 young men heard the news about Alexa's death. He had been the one who had seen them loading rocks into the Silverado. He knew. He called Koenig and asked him if he knew anything about it. That information, combined with other tips, led investigators to focus on Koenig, Carol Chick, and Kwok. The Jefferson County investigators secured warrants for the teenagers' cell phone records. The data was damning. It placed their phones in the exact locations of each of the rock-throwing incidents, a digital map that traced their path of destruction across Jefferson and Boulder counties. And it confirmed the most sickening detail of all. It showed their phone moving back toward the scene of the fatal crash after the attack, corroborating the story that they had returned to view their handiwork. About a week after Alexa's murder, all 3 were arrested and charged with first-degree murder with extreme indifference to human life, along with a string of other charges for the other attacks. The community, which had been living in fear since the senseless attacks, could finally breathe a small sigh of relief. The predators who had turned their roads into a shooting gallery were in custody. The legal process that followed would stretch over 2 agonizing years, forcing Alexa Bartell's family to relive the horror of her death in countless courtroom hearings. Facing a mountain of evidence, 2 of the defendants chose to make deals with the prosecution. Zachary Kwok, the one who was newest to the group, was the first to fold. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree assault and 1 count of attempted second-degree assault. He was sentenced to 32 years in prison. Next came Nicholas Mitch Karolchik, Joseph Koenig's lifelong friend. His plea deal was more complex. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder, with a crime of violence enhancer. A crucial condition of his deal was that he had to testify truthfully at the trial of his co-defendant, Joseph Koenig. In exchange for his cooperation, he faced a reduced, though still substantial, sentence. He was ultimately sentenced to 45 years behind bars. That left Joseph Koenig, the man prosecutors identified as the driver and the one who threw the fatal rock. He pleaded not guilty, and his case went to trial in April 2025, almost exactly 2 years after Alexa's death. The trial, held in a packed Jefferson County courtroom, was a wrenching affair. The prosecution, led by Chief Deputy District Attorney Catherine Decker, argued that Koenig's actions were frequent, focused, and fatal. They told the jury that he knew the risks, that throwing heavy rocks at oncoming cars was an act that demonstrated an extreme indifference to human life, the legal standard for the most serious murder charge in Colorado. Koenig's defense attorneys did not dispute his involvement in the rock-throwing spree. They couldn't. The evidence was overwhelming. Instead, they argued that he was guilty only of manslaughter, not murder. In his mind, they weren't targeting drivers, they were targeting cars, defense attorney Thomas Ward told the jury. They also attempted to cast doubt on who threw the fatal rock, pointing to initial police interviews where Karolchik had lied to protect his friend and blamed Kwok. The trial became a grim theater of betrayal and recrimination. Both Kwok and Carol Chick took the stand to testify against their former friend. Their testimonies painted a damning portrait of the night of April 19, 2023. Carol Chick, in a dramatic reversal, told the jury that he had lied in his initial interviews to protect Koenig. He testified that Koenig had convinced him to blame Kwok, the person he barely knew. Joe said we won't have to worry about it because we'll just say that Zach did it, Carol Chick told the court. He then looked at the jury and confirmed that it was Joseph Koenig who threw the rock that killed Alexa Bartel. For Alexa's family, the trial was an excruciating ordeal. Her mother, Kelly, sat in the courtroom day after day, wearing a blue ribbon with an angel pin, a small tribute to the daughter who was now her angel. She testified about the last time she saw Alexa, how they had exchanged their usual "I love yous," but something had made her give her daughter an extra hug and remind her to be safe. Jenna Griggs took the stand and described the horror of being on the phone with Alexa, hearing the silence, and then finding her in the wrecked car. After a week of heart-wrenching testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for less than 24 hours. On April 25, 2025, the verdict was read. Joseph Koenig was found guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder. Outside the courtroom, Kelly Bartel spoke through her tears. "It's hard to be happy or feel satisfied that justice was served today because I feel one amazing life was lost, and 3 others are also lost and impacted," she said, her voice thick with a grief that no verdict could erase. "And I don't want to celebrate that, but I do think justice was served." On June 3, 2025, Joseph Koenig returned to court for his sentencing. In Colorado, a conviction for first-degree murder carries a mandatory sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Before the sentence was formally handed down, Koenig, dressed in a sweater and dress pants, stood and addressed the court and Alexa's family. "I have no excuse and I have no explanation for what Mitch, Zach, and I did that night," he said, his voice barely audible. "But I hope you believe me when I tell you that we didn't intend to hurt Alexa or hurt anybody. Looking back on it now, it seems obvious that someone was going to get hurt or killed." His apology rang hollow in the face of the devastation he had caused. Kelly Bartel described her new reality in a victim impact statement that left the courtroom in stunned silence. "That night was every parent's worst nightmare, and it didn't just change my life. It changed who I am," she said. "Losing my daughter didn't just break my heart, it broke me. It shattered my soul. Everything I see and live is different now." Judge Christopher Zenisek, in handing down the sentence, acknowledged the profound impact of Alexa's life, even on those who had only come to know her through the tragedy of her death. He then sentenced Koenig to the mandatory life sentence without parole for the murder, and added an additional 60 years for the other felonies, to run consecutively. The legal chapter was closed. 3 young men, who had traded their futures for a few moments of reckless, destructive thrill, were behind bars for decades, one for the rest of his life. But for the family of Alexa Bartel, there is no closure. There is only the before and the after. The world lost a force for good, a colorful light extinguished by a stone thrown from the darkness. In the years since her death, her family has tried to reclaim the site of the tragedy, to transform a place of horror into a place of beauty. They have scattered wildflower seeds along the roadside where her life was taken, hoping to create a living memorial. Story 3. In the small, tight-knit town of Hemphill, Texas, nestled among the piney woods near the Louisiana border, life moved at its own pace. It was a place where roots ran deep, where Friday night football was a religion, and where everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did. In this small-town tapestry, 19-year-old Libby Lewis was a vibrant, shining thread. With a smile that could light up the darkest corners of a room, and a spirit that was both fiercely independent and deeply kind, Libby was on the cusp of a life brimming with promise. A high school valedictorian, she had a sharp mind and even bigger dreams, dreams that were beginning to take shape beyond the familiar horizons of Sabine County. Libby was a study in contrasts. She was a tomboy who loved to hunt and fish, comfortable in camouflage and mud-caked boots. Yet she could transform into a vision of glamour, her natural beauty turning heads wherever she went. She was a devoted daughter to her mother, Darcy Bass, their bond forged in the fires of single parenthood and tempered into an unbreakable alloy of love and friendship. To her friends, she was a fierce protector, a loyal confidant, the one you called in the middle of the night. Her laughter was infectious, her energy boundless. She was, in short, a young woman in full bloom, her future a wide-open Texas sky. But even the brightest skies can be darkened by a gathering storm. For Livy, that storm had a name, Matthew Hoy Edgar. At 23, Matthew was a few years older than Livy, a man already carrying the baggage of a failed marriage and 2 young children. He was charismatic in a rough-hewn, small-town way, his charm a potent lure. When he and Livy got together, the relationship was intense, a whirlwind romance that, for a time, seemed to sweep Livy off her feet. She fell for him, and she fell hard, embracing not just Matthew, but his entire world, including his children, whom she adored as if they were her own. She was good to him, a steadying presence in his often chaotic life. The cracks, however, began to show. Matthew's charm had a dark flip side, a possessive, jealous streak that simmered just beneath the surface. His insecurities were a constant, low-grade fever in the relationship, flaring up with little provocation. A few weeks before Halloween of 2020, Livy, a young woman who valued her independence and refused to be caged, had made the difficult decision to end it. The breakup was clean, she thought. She was moving on, reclaiming her life, her future stretching before her once more. But Matthew Edgar was not a man who let go easily. The night of October 30th, 2020, bled into the early morning of Halloween. The air in Hemphill was thick with the scent of pine and the palpable excitement of a holiday weekend. A pre-Halloween party was in full swing at the home of Bobby Ozan, a mutual friend. The music was loud, the drinks were flowing, and the night was a kaleidoscope of costumes and laughter. Livy was there, radiant and carefree, enjoying a night out with her friends. Also at the party was Matthew Edgar, a ghost at the feast, his presence a heavy, unspoken weight in the room. And in a twist that was common in a town of Hemphill's size, Matthew's ex-wife, Montana Bacall, was there too. Despite the tangled web of their past relationships, Livy and Montana were on friendly terms, 2 women navigating the choppy waters of life and love in a small town. As the night wore on, Livy and Montana stuck together, a small island of solidarity. They laughed and danced, pointedly ignoring Matthew, who watched from the periphery, his mood darkening with every passing hour. He was a man adrift, watching the woman he couldn't have, the woman who had rejected him, moving on without him. For Matthew, it was a public humiliation, a wound to his fragile pride. The party began to thin out. By 2:30 a.m., only a handful of people remained, including Livy and Montana. Matthew had left earlier, but like a bad penny he returned, his presence now laced with a palpable menace. He overheard a snippet of conversation, a casual remark that would become the spark in the powder keg of his mind. Livy was planning to spend the night at Bobby Ozan's house. The thought of Livy with another man, even platonically, was more than Matthew's jealousy could bear. The simmering resentment boiled over into a white-hot rage. He turned his fury not on Bobby, but on his ex-wife, Montana, whom he accused of facilitating the imagined betrayal. He felt she could have stopped Livy, could have prevented this ultimate act of disrespect. He began attacking Montana, his fists flying, his rage a wild, untethered thing. He kicked her car, the sound of metal denting metal a percussive accompaniment to his furious shouts. Bobby Ozan, the host of the now-shattered party, jumped in, trying to restrain Matthew, to pull him back from the brink. His intervention gave the 2 women a precious few seconds to escape. Montana, terrified, fled to the one place she thought she might be safe, the home of Matthew's own grandparents, seeking refuge from the grandson they had helped raise. Livy jumped into her car and drove off into the darkness, her destination unknown. The night, which had begun with such promise, had dissolved into chaos and fear. The darkness of a rural Texas road is an absolute. It swallows the headlights, pressing in on all sides, a velvet curtain that conceals the world. Somewhere on one of these lonely roads, Livy Lewis pulled her car over to the shoulder. Perhaps she was trying to gather her thoughts, her heart still pounding from the violent end to the party. Perhaps her phone rang, a familiar name flashing on the screen, a voice promising to explain, to apologize. Whatever the reason, she stopped. She trusted him. At around 5:15 on the morning of Halloween, a passerby noticed a car parked oddly on the side of the road. It was not an uncommon sight, but something about the scene felt wrong. The Good Samaritan pulled over to help and stumbled into a nightmare. Inside the car, slumped over the steering wheel, was a young woman. She had no pulse. Behind her car was a black pickup truck, and lying on the cold, damp ground between the two vehicles, curled in a fetal position, was a man covered in blood, unconscious but alive. The wail of sirens sliced through the pre-dawn stillness, a sound that would become the soundtrack to a mother's worst fears. When first responders arrived, they were met with a scene of baffling, heartbreaking tragedy. The young woman in the car was quickly identified. It was Livy Lewis. She had been shot once, a single, fatal wound to the neck. Her body was positioned in a way that told a story of its own. Her legs were crossed, her posture relaxed. She showed no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle. She had been calm, her guard down, talking to someone she knew, someone she trusted, completely unaware that her life was about to be extinguished. The man on the ground was Matthew Edgar. He was disoriented, confused, his face and clothes smeared with blood that was not his own. He was transported to the hospital, his mind a supposed blank slate. Investigators began the grim task of processing the scene. In the damp grass near the cars, they found a rifle. They found Matthew's boots and his hat, scattered as if in a hurry. Inside Livy's car, the scene was eerily incomplete. Her cell phone and her car keys were missing. But a search of the black pickup truck, which belonged to Matthew's cousin, revealed the missing items. Livy's phone and keys were in Matthew's possession. The picture was beginning to come together, each piece a small, sharp shard of a horrifying truth. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale, gray light on the scene, another car sped down the road. It was Darcy Bass, Livy's mother. A friend had called, a garbled, frantic message about an accident. Darcy arrived in a panic, her mind racing with 1,000 terrible possibilities, but none as terrible as the one that awaited her. Bodycam footage from the officers at the scene captured the moment a mother's world fell apart. She pleaded with the officers, her voice rising in desperation, asking again and again where her daughter was. At least 23 times she asked, her questions met with the evasive, gentle language that police use when they are trying to delay the inevitable. Finally, an officer told her. Livy was in the car. Darcy Bass collapsed to the ground, her cries of anguish swallowed by the vast, indifferent Texas sky. At the hospital, Sabine County Sheriff's investigator J.P. McDonough found Matthew Edgar in a bed, the blood now clean from his face, a look of bewildered innocence in his eyes. The entire encounter was captured on McDonough's body cam. "I have no clue why I'm here," Matthew said, his voice soft, almost childlike. He admitted to drinking a lot. A whole bottle of Jim Beam, he said, and a few beers earlier in the day. He remembered being at Bobby Ozan's party. He remembered going home to his own porch. And then nothing. A complete blackout, he claimed, until he woke up in the ambulance, the world a confusing blur of flashing lights and concerned faces. McDonough, a seasoned investigator who had seen his share of lies, listened patiently. Then he delivered the news. Livy Lewis was found dead in her car. Matthew appeared to cry, his shoulders shaking with sobs that McDonough found utterly unconvincing. The performance was too polished, the amnesia too convenient. While Matthew was still in that hospital bed, claiming to be a victim of a memory he couldn't access, investigator McDonough arrested him for the murder of Livy Lewis. The case against Matthew Edgar seemed open and shut. But the wheels of justice, especially during a global pandemic, grind exceedingly slow. With grand juries not being convened due to COVID-19 protocols, the legal system found itself in a state of paralysis. A judge, his hands tied by the law, was forced to release a still unindicted Matthew Edgar on a shockingly low $50,000 bond. For Darcy Bass and her family, it was a slap in the face, a betrayal by the very system that was supposed to deliver justice for her daughter. A murderer, they believed, was walking free among them. Months after his release, Darcy was at her local convenience store when Matthew Edgar strolled in, a casual, arrogant smirk on his face. The sight of her daughter's killer, free and seemingly unbothered, was too much for the grieving mother to bear. "I just started throwing whatever at him and went for him," she later recalled. "I just remember saying, 'You killed my daughter. You killed my daughter.'" In a move of breathtaking audacity, Matthew pressed charges against Darcy. She was arrested. The charges would eventually be dropped, but the incident was a stark illustration of the surreal, waking nightmare her life had become. While Matthew was out on bail, investigators were unearthing the digital breadcrumbs that would seal his fate. They recovered the text messages exchanged between Matthew and his ex-wife, Montana Bacall, in the frantic hours after the party. Montana, having fled to Matthew's grandparents' house, began texting him, her messages a desperate plea for information and a record of his escalating rage. At 3:34 a.m., she sent the text that would become the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. "Where is Livy?" Matthew's response was a single, chilling word: dead. Finally, on March 16, 2021, nearly 5 months after the murder, a grand jury was able to convene. They heard the evidence, the text messages, the body cam footage, the forensic findings, and officially indicted Matthew Edgar for the murder of Livy Lewis. He was ordered to wear an ankle monitor, a small, electronic tether to the justice system he had so far managed to evade. His trial was set for January 2022. As the trial date approached, Matthew Edgar showed little concern. He was so confident in his eventual acquittal, so certain that his blackout defense would be believed, that he began trying to line up a new job for after the trial. His mother, Cindy Hogan, launched a bizarre and baseless campaign to clear her son's name, spinning a fairy tale for anyone who would listen. She claimed that Livy had been killed by a dangerous drug dealer to whom Matthew owed $30,000. It was a desperate, transparent attempt to muddy the waters, a narrative that investigators quickly and publicly dismissed. There was no evidence, nothing to support her claims. All the evidence pointed directly, unequivocally, at her son. The trial of Matthew Edgar began as scheduled. For 2 days, he sat in the courtroom, listening as the prosecution laid out the case against him, his face an impassive mask. Darcy Bass and her family sat just feet away, enduring the excruciating details of Livy's final moments, their grief a palpable presence in the room. On the 3rd day of testimony, the defense attorney, Rayford Adams, Jr., arrived at the courthouse. But his client was not with him. Matthew Edgar had vanished. His mother informed the court that her son was not in a good place and had gone to the woods to clear his head. But the truth was far more calculated. Matthew Edgar had cut off his ankle monitor and fled. He was a fugitive from justice. The judge, determined not to let Edgar's cowardice derail the proceedings, made a bold decision. The trial would continue in his absence. The jury would hear the rest of the evidence and deliver a verdict, whether the defendant was there to hear it or not. For the next several days, the prosecution continued to build its case, brick by painful brick. The jury heard the chilling dead text message. They saw the body cam footage of Matthew's unconvincing performance at the hospital. They listened to the testimony of friends and family who painted a portrait of a jealous, controlling man pushed to the edge by rejection. After deliberating, the jury returned with a verdict. They found Matthew Edgar, the man who was now a ghost in his own trial, guilty of the murder of Livy Lewis. The verdict was a moment of profound relief for Darcy and her family, but the story was not over. A convicted murderer was on the run. A nationwide manhunt was launched. For weeks, Matthew Edgar remained a phantom, his whereabouts a mystery. Finally, authorities received a tip. He was hiding out in a cabin in East Texas, not far from where he had committed his crime. A team of law enforcement officers descended on the location, and Matthew Edgar was captured without incident. His time on the run was over. On January 3, 2023, Matthew Edgar was formally sentenced. He was given 99 years in prison, a sentence that ensures he will likely never again walk free. He will be eligible for parole, but not for 30 years. For the murder of Livy Lewis, a crime born of jealousy and pride, a man who believed he could outrun justice was finally brought to account. The story of Livy Lewis is a tragedy, a heartbreaking tale of a life cut short, of a future stolen. But it is also a story of a mother's relentless love, a community's pursuit of truth, and the ultimate, inescapable reach of justice. A force as patient and persistent as the East Texas pines that stand silent witness to the stories of those who live and die beneath their branches. Story 4. The winter of 2025 was beginning to loosen its grip on Brisbane, the air in late August carrying the first, tentative whispers of a Queensland spring. The days were bright and clear, the sky a vast, unapologetic blue. In the leafy inner-city suburb of Kelvin Grove, life moved to the familiar rhythm of a city awakening. Here, amidst the hum of traffic and the chatter of university students, lived Andrew Burrow. At 56, he was a man who had built a life of quiet substance, a man who found his purpose not in grand gestures, but in the steady, dependable currents of love and loyalty. Andrew was a father, a role he cherished above all others. He was a son and a brother, the reliable bedrock of his family. To the world, he was an IT and cybersecurity expert, a man who navigated the complex, invisible architecture of the digital age with a calm and methodical mind. His friends and family, however, knew a different side of him. They knew his entrepreneurial spirit, his infectious enthusiasm for a new idea, his willingness to take a chance on a venture that others might dismiss. They knew his generosity, a quiet, unassuming kindness that extended to everyone he met. He was, as his family would later say with a heartbreak that was almost palpable, a man who was always willing to give people a second chance. It was a quality that defined him, a testament to his faith in the inherent goodness of others. It was a quality that, in the end, would be tragically, brutally betrayed. The days leading up to his disappearance were unremarkable, a simple tapestry of work and family. He was a man of routines, his life a series of familiar patterns. But on Tuesday, August 20th, that pattern was broken. It was the last time he was seen at his Kelvin Grove apartment, the last time his life could be measured in ordinary moments. The following day, he had a meeting. It was with a man he knew, a 26-year-old from the sprawling suburban expanse of North Lakes. The details of that meeting are shrouded in the grim silence of an ongoing investigation, but what is known is that it was not a meeting of friends or colleagues. It was an appointment with a nightmare. It was the beginning of an ordeal that would stretch across the vast, sun-drenched landscape of southeast Queensland, a journey into a heart of darkness that was as unimaginable as it was real. For the next few days, Andrew Burrow's world shrank to the confines of a moving prison. He was no longer a father, a son, a brother. He was a captive, his life in the hands of men who had stripped him of his dignity, his freedom, and ultimately his future. Police would later allege that he was taken to as many as 8 different locations, a horrifying pilgrimage of pain and terror. From the bustling streets of Brisbane to the quiet, coastal towns of the Sunshine Coast, he was moved from one hidden place to another, each stop a new station in a journey of unimaginable suffering. He was a ghost moving through the bright, oblivious world, his ordeal a secret kept by the men who held him and the silent, isolated places they took him. Back in the world he had left behind, a quiet unease was beginning to grow. Andrew was a man of his word, a man who showed up. When he missed a family gathering, it was a discordant note in the symphony of their lives. When his phone went unanswered, the unease sharpened into a genuine, gnawing worry. This wasn't like him. This wasn't Andrew. His family, a tight-knit clan who relied on his steady presence, felt his absence like a physical ache. On August 24th, for days after he was last seen, they could bear the silence no longer. They went to the police and reported him missing. The initial report was handled with the routine professionalism that attends to all such cases. A man was missing. There could be 100 reasons, most of them benign. But as investigators from the Brisbane City Criminal Investigation Branch began to make their preliminary inquiries, the benign explanations quickly fell away. This was not a man who had decided to take an impromptu vacation. This was not a man who had simply walked away from his life. The evidence of a loving family, a stable job, and a life deeply rooted in his community all pointed to something else, something far more sinister. The first major break in the case came not from a witness or a confession, but from a quiet, rural property in Bli, a small town nestled in the hinterland of the Sunshine Coast. There, investigators found the remnants of a fire, and amidst the ashes, a collection of objects that told a chilling story. There was a mobile phone, burnt and broken. There were zip ties, the innocuous tools of a handyman transformed into instruments of restraint. There were charred alcohol wipes. And there was a piece of paper, a note that sent a jolt of cold terror through even the most seasoned detectives. On it were written the names and addresses of Andrew Burrow's parents. It was a discovery that changed everything. This was not just a missing person. This was a man who was being held against his will. A man whose captors knew who his family was. A man whose life was being used as leverage in a game that was rapidly escalating. The investigation, which had begun with a quiet concern, now blared with the urgency of a life-and-death struggle. Detective Acting Inspector Murray O'Connell, a man whose calm, methodical demeanor belied a fierce determination, knew that they were in a race against time. The investigation expanded, the web of inquiry spreading out across the sprawling geography of southeast Queensland. The names of the suspects began to surface. The 26-year-old from North Lakes, the one who knew Andrew, a 38-year-old from Sippy Downs, and a 57-year-old from Budrum. As police dug into the lives of these men, they uncovered another, even more horrifying piece of the puzzle. They found images, photographs that depicted Andrew Burrow, not as a missing person, but as a victim. He had been brutally, systematically beaten. The images were a silent, graphic testament to the torture he had endured. We had serious concerns for his well-being, Detective O'Connell would later tell the press, his words a model of professional understatement that could not fully conceal the horror of what his team had discovered. The hope of finding Andrew alive, which had sustained both his family and the investigators, was beginning to flicker and fade. But they did not give up. Despite our serious worries, we remained optimistic about locating him alive, O'Connell said, a public expression of a hope that, in private, must have felt increasingly fragile. The two younger men, the 26-year-old and the 38-year-old, were arrested and charged with torture. But the larger questions remained. Where was Andrew? Was he still alive? And if not, where was his body? The investigation had become a desperate hunt for a man who had been swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape. The police had a theory, a suspected motive for the crime, but with the case moving towards the courts, they kept it close to their chest. Unconfirmed reports began to circulate in the media, whispers of a link to the powerful CFMEU trade union, a tantalizing but unverified clue to the why that lay at the heart of this monstrous crime. The police turned to the public for help. They released details of 3 vehicles that had been confiscated during their inquiries, a plea for anyone who might have seen them in those critical days in late August. It was a long shot, a search for a needle in a haystack of 1,000 country roads and 1,000,000 passing cars. But in the modern age of crime solving, the eyes of the public are an invaluable, often decisive tool. A few days later, the call came. A tip to Crime Stoppers, a single piece of information from a citizen who had seen something, who knew something. It was about a fire in the Blackbutt area, a remote, rugged part of the state, inland from the Sunshine Coast. It was the lead the police had been praying for. The focus of the investigation shifted to the vast, sparsely populated hinterland. Search teams were deployed, their methodical sweeps of the bushland a stark contrast to the chaotic violence they were investigating. Additional crime scenes were established. And then on September 2nd, 2 weeks after Andrew Burrow had sat down for a meeting with a man he knew, the search came to its heartbreaking conclusion. By the side of a lonely country road, near Brooklands Pimpin' Budgie Road in Maidenwell, investigators found human remains. The man who had been a loving father, a loyal son, a brilliant mind, had been found. He had been murdered, his body discarded with a callous indifference that was the final, brutal insult to a life lived with kindness and integrity. The date of his death, police would allege, was on or around August 25th. His body had been dumped here a day later, left to the elements, a secret that his killers believed the vast emptiness of the country would keep forever. The discovery was a devastating blow to Andrew's family, the final, brutal confirmation of their worst fears. The flicker of hope that they had clung to for 2 agonizing weeks was extinguished. Their son, their brother, their father was gone. In a statement released to the media, their grief was a palpable, living thing. They asked for privacy, a small shield against a world that had suddenly become intrusive and cruel. But they also found the strength to speak of the man they had lost, to reclaim his memory from the horror of his final days. Andrew will be remembered as a caring and loving father, a loyal and generous son and brother, and someone who was always willing to give people a second chance, the statement read. We will miss his enthusiasm for life, his entrepreneurial mindset, and his willingness to give ideas a go. In their raw, unfiltered grief, they offered a glimpse of the man behind the headlines, a man of warmth and substance, a man whose life was a testament to the very best of the human spirit. And then a simple, heartbreaking sentence that spoke to the profound, senseless tragedy of it all. Terrible things can happen to good people. With the discovery of the body, the case against the 3 men solidified. The charges were upgraded. The 26-year-old from North Lakes, the 38-year-old from Sippy Downs, and the 57-year-old from Budrum were now charged not just with torture, but with murder, kidnapping, extortion, and misconduct with a corpse. The full, horrifying scope of their alleged crimes was now a matter of public record. They had not just killed a man, they had terrorized him, extorted him, tortured him over a period of 3 to 4 days, and then, after ending his life, they had treated his body with a contempt that defied comprehension. The 3 men appeared in the Brisbane Magistrates' Court. They could not apply for bail. They would be remanded in custody, their journey through the legal system just beginning. For the family of Andrew Burrow, it was the start of a new, different kind of ordeal, a long and arduous path toward a justice that could never truly restore what they had lost. The story of Andrew Burrow's murder is a story that is still being written. The why remains a closely guarded secret, a question that will only be answered in the cold, formal setting of a courtroom. But the what is a story of a darkness that is as profound as it is terrifying. It is the story of a good man who fell into the hands of predators, a man whose fundamental decency was met with an organized, premeditated brutality. It is a story of a family's love and a community's help, a testament to the power of a single phone call to unravel a monstrous crime. And at its heart, it is a story that serves as a chilling reminder that behind the placid facade of ordinary life, in the bright sunshine of a Queensland spring, monsters can and do walk among us. The final chapter of Andrew Burrow's story will be written not by his killers, but by the legal system that now holds them accountable, and by the family that will carry his memory, a small, defiant light against an encroaching and incomprehensible darkness. Story 5. In the quiet northern town of Catsrin, nestled in the Golan Heights where the landscape stretched out in rugged, windswept beauty, life for 13-year-old Ter Rada moved at the unhurried pace of adolescence. Catsrin was a small community, home to about 7,000 souls, many of them families drawn to the area's promise of fresh air and tight-knit bonds, far from the bustle of Israel's larger cities. Ter, with her dark hair often tied back in a simple ponytail and eyes that sparkled with the curiosity of youth, was an ordinary girl in extraordinary circumstances. Her family had immigrated from Russia when she was young, seeking a better life in this promised land. She attended Nofii Golan School, a modest institution where the hallways echoed with the chatter of students and the occasional creak of old wooden floors. On the morning of December 6, 2006, Tare woke up as she always did, perhaps lingering a bit over breakfast with her mother, Ilana, and her younger sister, discussing the day's plans with the casual optimism that defines a school day. The sky outside was overcast, a typical winter chill hanging in the air, but nothing suggested the tragedy that would soon shatter their world. Tara arrived at school that day like any other, her backpack slung over one shoulder, filled with notebooks and dreams of becoming a doctor one day. She was known among her friends as kind-hearted, someone who shied away from confrontation and certainly didn't smoke or curse, traits that made her stand out in a group of typical preteens testing boundaries. The school, a two-story building with classrooms lining corridors that smelled faintly of chalk and polished wood, buzzed with the routine of midweek classes. As the day progressed, the final period approached, a math lesson that Tare, like many of her peers, found tedious. Around 3:30 p.m., during a break, she decided to skip the last class, a small act of rebellion that felt thrilling in its harmlessness. She lingered in the schoolyard with a few friends, laughing under the gray sky, the wind tugging at their jackets. The yard was a patch of concrete surrounded by chain-link fences, where students often gathered to share secrets or plan weekend adventures. After a while, Tare mentioned she was thirsty and headed back inside, waving goodbye to her companions. Several students saw her climbing the staircase to the mid-floor, where the 10th grade classrooms were located, her footsteps light and unhurried. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. As the afternoon wore on and the school emptied, Tare's absence didn't immediately raise alarms. Her mother, Ilana, a resilient woman who worked hard to provide for her family, expected Tare home around 4 p.m. When the clock ticked past that hour, Ilana called the school, her voice laced with growing concern. By evening, worry had turned to panic. She contacted the police, who launched a search. Volunteers from the tight-knit community fanned out across Katsrin's streets, calling Tare's name into the gathering dusk. The Golan Heights, with its vast open spaces and hidden trails, suddenly felt menacing, a place where a young girl could vanish without a trace. Around 7 p.m., as searchers combed the school building one last time, a janitor unlocked the girl's bathroom on the second floor, a place that had been overlooked amid the chaos. The door to one stall was locked from the inside, an oddity that sent a chill through the group. Peering over, they saw her, Tare slumped in a pool of blood, her throat slashed twice, deep cuts across her face, torso, and hands, and severe trauma to her head from blunt force. The scene was horrific, a violent end in a space meant for innocence. Paramedics arrived swiftly, but it was too late. Tare was gone, her young life extinguished in a moment of unimaginable brutality. The discovery plunged Katsrin into shock. Parents huddled in whispers, teachers wept openly, and the police cordoned off the school, turning the familiar building into a crime scene. Initial reports suggested classmates might be involved, a theory born from the intimacy of the location. The murder had occurred inside the locked bathroom, the stall door secured from within, implying the killer had either escaped over the partition or been someone Tare knew and trusted. Investigators swarmed the area, collecting evidence. Blood spatter on the walls, a trail leading from the sink, and personal items like Tare's backpack nearby. The weapon appeared to be a knife, possibly serrated, given the jagged wounds, though no murder weapon was found at the scene. A bloody footprint on her jeans hinted at the killer's shoe size, later estimated around 42 to 43, matching adult footwear. That first night, police detained a homeless man wandering nearby, hoping for a quick resolution to ease the community's fear. 3 days later, suspicion fell on the school gardener, a local figure who knew the grounds well. Both were interrogated intensely but released within days, their alibis ironclad. They hadn't been near the school during the critical window. The focus shifted inward, to the school's staff and routines, as whispers of darker secrets began to circulate. Roman Zdorov, a 28-year-old Ukrainian immigrant who had moved to Israel seeking opportunity, worked as a floorer at Nofii Golan School. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a quiet demeanor shaped by a difficult past in post-Soviet Ukraine, Zdorov had been laying tiles in various parts of the building for weeks. He spoke Hebrew haltingly, his accent thick, and kept to himself, avoiding the lively chaos of the students. On December 11th, 5 days after the murder, police brought him in for questioning. Zdorov arrived at the station puzzled, cooperating fully as officers probed his whereabouts and interactions. The interrogation stretched into hours, the room stark under fluorescent lights, with detectives pressing on minor inconsistencies in his timeline. On December 19th, police held a dramatic press conference during primetime news, announcing Zdorov as the prime suspect. They claimed he had confessed and even reenacted the crime, a revelation that stunned the nation watching on television. Reporters swarmed Katsrin, turning the sleepy town into a media circus, with headlines screaming of the breakthrough. But the next day, Zdorov's attorney shattered the narrative. His client had recanted, alleging coercion and fabrication during the grueling sessions. No signed confession existed. Zdorov refused to endorse the second one, insisting the details were fed to him by investigators desperate for closure. The proposed motive crumbled almost immediately. Police initially suggested Ter had asked Zdorov for a cigarette. He refused, and she insulted him, sparking rage. Yet everyone who knew Ter, her mother, teachers, friends, insisted she detested smoking, couldn't stand the smell, and was never rude. Ilana Rada, her face etched with grief in every interview, described her daughter as gentle, a girl who helped with chores and dreamed of healing others. The cigarette story evaporated, replaced by vague claims of Zdorov's childhood trauma from alleged abuse in Ukraine, triggered by student teasing. But no evidence supported this. It was speculation, unproven and inflammatory. The indictment, filed in January 2007 at Nazareth District Court, offered no clear motive at all, relying instead on circumstantial ties. Zdorov was charged with murder and obstructing justice, his life upended as he entered a legal labyrinth that would consume years. Meanwhile, Ilana clung to Ter's memory, sifting through photos and memories, her heart aching for answers in a home now silent without her daughter's laughter. As the trial unfolded, doubts about the evidence mounted like storm clouds over the Golan. DNA tests, initially leaked as a match to Zdorov, proved inconclusive. No profile linked him directly to the scene. Hairs found on Ter's body belonged to unknown individuals, 3 different people, yet testing halted once Zdorov confessed, a decision later criticized as premature. The bloody shoe print on her jeans, touted as a match to Zdorov's salamander shoes, came under scrutiny from international experts. British specialist Dr. Guy Cooper testified in 2009 that the stains weren't identifiable as shoe prints at all, let alone Zdorov's. FBI veteran William Bodziak echoed this in 2013, calling the analysis flawed. The court dismissed both, siding with police expert Yaron Shore, but the discrepancies fueled public skepticism. Witnesses from the school recalled seeing Ter's Puma shoes under the stall door, alongside other youth-sized all-stars in blood, suggesting multiple people nearby during the struggle. Students had passed through the bathroom around 3:45 p.m., some noticing odd sounds or glimpses of horror, yet no one raised alarms until too late. Ilana, attending every hearing, believed the killer was from Ter's world. Perhaps peers involved in something darker, like rumored satanic influences among the teens. Her theory, born from maternal intuition and grief, added layers of intrigue to the case. The September 2010 verdict was a 456-page tome, read aloud in a packed Nazareth courtroom. Presiding Judge Yitzhak Cohen, flanked by 2 colleagues, declared no doubt of Zdorov's guilt, labeling his testimony lies and manipulations. Life imprisonment followed, with an additional conviction for obstructing the investigation. Zdorov, pale and composed, maintained his innocence, his family, wife Julia and young son, standing by him in the gallery, their faces masks of devastation. Appeals began immediately, winding through Israel's Supreme Court. In March 2013, The court remanded the case for re-examination of key evidence, the footprint and the knife. Pathologist Dr. Maya Foreman-Resnick testified the wounds suggested a serrated blade, not the smooth Japanese knife police claims Dorov used. But in February 2014, the district court reaffirmed the conviction, rejecting her opinion and calling footprint doubts embarrassing. December 2015 brought a 2-1 Supreme Court denial, with the majority citing Dorov's reenactment and informant confession as decisive, despite evidentiary gaps. The dissenting justice saw too much doubt, a crack in the facade that widened over time. Behind the scenes, scandals eroded trust in the prosecution. Judge Cohen resigned in 2014, his departure casting shadows on the trial's integrity. Dr. Foreman faced retaliation for her testimony. Chief Prosecutor Shai Nitzan sought to bar her from future court appearances, sparking a labor battle where she emerged victorious, backed by the Medical Association. Forensic expert Dr. Hen Kugel, initially solicited by prosecutors, affirmed Foreman's serrated knife theory in an affidavit, revealing the state's attempt to edit it, a move decried as witness tampering. Commissioner Hila Gerstel's oversight report found prosecutorial misconduct, but resistance from the Attorney General stalled reforms. The prosecutors' union even struck in 2016, protesting oversight, leading to Gerstel's resignation. These events painted a picture of a justice system protecting itself, prioritizing conviction over truth, as critics like Professor Mordecai Kremnitzer argued. Zdorov, rotting in prison, became a symbol of potential injustice, his supporters growing into a vocal movement. By 2018, new DNA analysis from Abu Kabir Institute matched a hair on Ter's body not to Zdorov, but possibly to Habani among thousands of profiles. This, coupled with mounting doubts, prompted Zdorov's 2019 Supreme Court petition for retrial. In May 2021, Justice Hanan Melser, in his final ruling, found sufficient reasonable doubt, ordering a new trial. Zdorov was released to house arrest in August 2021, after 15 years incarcerated, fitted with an electronic bracelet and barred from visitors. The prosecution re-indicted him, calling over a dozen witnesses, including Kravchenko, but evidence against her remained thin. The retrial at Nazareth District Court began amid national anticipation, live-streamed sessions drawing thousands. Experts revisited old wounds, the confession's coercion, evidentiary mismatches, and unanswered questions like how Zdorov escaped blood-soaked without witnesses. On March 30th, 2023, the verdict dropped like a thunderclap. In a 700-page decision, two judges, Asher Kula and Danny Sarfati, acquitted Zdorov, citing firm and reasonable doubt. They dissected the confession as potentially false, induced by pressure, and noted Zdorov's lack of violent history or motive. Why murder at his workplace, leaving evidence behind? Sarfati asked, highlighting impossibilities. The third judge, Tamar Nissim Shai, dissented fiercely, insisting the confession's details proved guilt beyond doubt. Zdorov wept in court, embracing his family, whispering, "The truth has emerged victorious." Ilana, tears streaming, vowed to continue the fight. "This isn't over. I will find the murderers." She blamed prosecutors for a cover-up, her grief undimmed after 16 years. The ruling sparked political firestorms, with figures like Simcha Rothman linking it to judicial reform debates, decrying unchecked power. In the aftermath, the prosecution weighed an appeal but ultimately declined, acknowledging the evidence's frailties. Zdorov rebuilt his life, free but scarred, his marriage strained by years apart, yet bolstered by supporters who saw him as exonerated. In September 2025, the state agreed to pay him NIS $17 million, about $5 million in compensation for the wrongful conviction, a sum approved by Tel Aviv District Court. The payment marked official closure on his ordeal, though scars lingered for all involved. Ilana, ever vigilant, pursued private investigations, convinced Ter's killers lurked among those closest to her. The case remained unsolved, a haunting reminder of justice's fragility. Rumors persisted of student cults, hidden motives, or overlooked clues, but no new arrests came. Catherine healed slowly, the school a place of memorials rather than fear, where Tare's name evoked both sorrow and unresolved tension. Tare's story, woven through courtrooms and screens, exposed the human cost of doubt and certainty. Ilana's unyielding quest mirrored a mother's unbreakable bond, her days filled with advocacy and quiet vigils at Tare's grave. Zdorov, once a suspect, became a cautionary tale of systemic flaws, his freedom bittersweet amid lost years. The Golan's winds carried whispers of what might have been, a young girl's promise cut short, leaving a nation to grapple with the shadows of truth. In the end, the mystery endured, a poignant echo of vulnerability in a world quick to judge. Story 6. The Florida sun, a relentless eye in the vast cerulean sky, beat down on the manicured lawns of Chiliota, a suburb of Orlando where the American dream was not just a concept but a tangible reality. In a spacious home on a quiet street, the Amato family lived a life that, from the outside, seemed to be the very picture of suburban bliss. Chad Amato, a successful clinical pharmacist, and his wife, Margaret, a senior operations manager, had built a comfortable world for themselves and their 3 sons. They were a close-knit family, bound by shared traditions and the easy camaraderie that comes from years of living under one roof. The family, including their sons Jason, Cody, and Grant, were avid fans of the Florida Gators football team, and their home was a hub of activity and warmth. Jason, the eldest, had moved out and started his own life, but Cody and Grant, both in their late 20s and early 30s, still lived at home. The 2 younger brothers had always been close, sharing a passion for weightlifting and health that had started in high school. They had both attended the University of Central Florida, pursuing careers in nursing. Cody, the older of the 2, had excelled, graduating from his nurse anesthetist program and securing a good job. Grant, however, had stumbled. He dropped out of the same program, a quiet failure that cast a long shadow over his relationship with his more successful brother. Still, he managed to find work as a nurse at Advent Health Orlando, and for a time, it seemed he was on a stable path. But beneath the surface of this idyllic family portrait, a darkness was beginning to fester, a hidden world of obsession and deceit that would soon consume them all. The first crack in the facade appeared in June 2018, when Grant was suspended from his job. The hospital suspected him of stealing medication, specifically the powerful sedative propofol, and administering it to patients without a doctor's order. When confronted, Grant claimed he was only trying to help patients who weren't adequately relaxed, but the evidence was damning. He was fired, and though the initial grand larceny charges were later dropped, the incident left a permanent stain on his record. Unemployed and adrift, Grant retreated into the digital world, a realm where he could escape the disappointment of his real life and reinvent himself. He told his family he wanted to become a professional video game streamer on Twitch. They, ever supportive, bought him the necessary equipment, hoping this new venture would give him a sense of purpose. But Grant's online activities were not what they seemed. He was not building a career, he was feeding an addiction. He spent his days and nights on erotic websites, his attention soon captured by one in particular, MyFreeCams. It was there that he met Sylvie, a Bulgarian cam model whose real name was Sylvia Venceslavova. She became his obsession, a digital phantom who danced and posed for him in the flickering glow of his computer screen. Grant fell deep into the rabbit hole of his infatuation. He would spend hours at a time in Sylvie's virtual company, paying by the minute for her attention. He crafted a new identity for himself, a persona of a wealthy and successful gamer, a man who could afford to lavish her with gifts and money. He sent her lingerie, and he paid exorbitant amounts for private shows. To fund this fantasy, he began to steal from his family, raiding their bank accounts and using their credit cards, all under the guise of building his Twitch career. Within a few short months, he had siphoned over $200,000 from them, a staggering sum that he poured into the black hole of his online obsession. The family, once a source of unwavering support, was now a wellspring of funds for Grant's secret life. But the truth, as it always does, eventually came to light. When Chad and Margaret discovered the extent of their son's theft and the nature of his online activities, their world was turned upside down. The son they had raised, the boy they had loved and supported, was a stranger to them, a man living a double life fueled by lies and stolen money. Their first instinct was to help him. They sent him to a rehabilitation facility for internet and pornography addiction, a costly last-ditch effort to pull him back from the brink. The treatment cost them $15,000, another financial blow on top of the hundreds of thousands he had already taken. After a few weeks, Grant was allowed to return home, but the family's trust had been shattered. They laid down a strict ultimatum. He had to get a job, and all contact with Sylvie was strictly forbidden. They changed the Wi-Fi password and cut off his phone service, desperate to sever the digital tether that bound him to his obsession. But Grant's addiction was too strong. He was a man possessed, and the rules of the real world no longer seemed to apply to him. He convinced his mother, perhaps preying on her maternal instinct and her lingering hope for his recovery, to let him use her phone. He promised it was for legitimate purposes, but his true intention was to reconnect with Sylvie, to once again lose himself in the fantasy that had become more real to him than his own life. When Chad discovered his son's latest deception, the last vestiges of his patience evaporated. The argument that followed was the final, fatal spark in a tinderbox of resentment and betrayal. Chad, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and heartbreak, ordered Grant to pack his things and leave. The ultimatum was no longer a warning, it was an expulsion. Grant was being cast out, his fantasy world about to come crashing down around him. In that moment, something inside him snapped. The shame, the anger, the desperation, it all coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. If he couldn't have his fantasy, then no one would have anything. On the evening of January 24th, 2019, a quiet dread settled over the Amato home. Margaret was at her computer, perhaps lost in her own thoughts, when Grant approached her from behind. He raised the IWI Jericho 941 pistol, the cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of the family home, and fired a single shot into the back of her head. She slumped forward, her life extinguished in an instant, a silent testament to her son's unfathomable betrayal. With his mother dead, Grant waited. The minutes ticked by, each one a heavy beat in the funereal silence of the house. He waited for his father to come home, his mind a maelstrom of dark thoughts. When Chad walked into the kitchen, weary from a day at work, Grant was ready. He shot his father twice, the sound of the gunshots echoing through the now empty house. Chad fell to the floor, his life's blood pooling on the cold ceramic tiles. In his last moments, he clawed at the floor, his fingerprints a desperate, final plea for a life that was already slipping away. 2 members of his family were dead, but Grant's gruesome work was not yet finished. He needed to eliminate the last potential witness, his brother Cody. Using his father's phone, he sent Cody a text message, luring him home with a false sense of normalcy. Cody, a dedicated nurse, was just finishing his shift. He had no reason to suspect that he was walking into a death trap, that his own brother was waiting for him, a gun in his hand and murder in his heart. When Cody walked through the door, Grant shot him without hesitation. Cody fell to the floor in a fetal position, his nurse scrub stained with his own blood, a backpack still slung over his shoulder. With his family dead, Grant's final act was one of calculated deception. He placed the gun by Cody's body, a clumsy attempt to stage the scene as a murder-suicide, to cast his brother as the perpetrator of this horrific crime. Then he fled, leaving behind the carnage he had wrought, a ghost in the haunted house of his own making. The next morning, January 25th, the silence at the Amato home was broken by the ringing of a phone. Cody had failed to show up for work, an uncharacteristic absence that immediately raised alarms among his colleagues. They called the police, requesting a wellness check. When deputies from the Seminole County Sheriff's Office arrived at the house, they found all the doors locked, the windows sealed. There was no answer to their calls. A sense of unease settled over them as they forced their way inside. The scene that greeted them was one of unimaginable horror. Margaret was slumped over her desk, a single gunshot wound to the back of her head. Chad lay in the kitchen, his body surrounded by a large pool of dried blood. And in a storage room near the garage, they found Cody, curled up on the floor, his life stolen from him just as he was starting to build it. The house, once a home filled with life and laughter, was now a tomb, a silent testament to a family destroyed from within. There were no signs of a break-in, no evidence of a robbery. The family's expensive electronics were untouched. It was clear that the killer was someone who had been welcomed into the home, someone the family had trusted. The deputy's attention quickly turned to the one person who was missing, Grant Amato. His car was gone, and he was nowhere to be found. A manhunt was launched, and the search for the missing son began. For 24 hours, Grant was a phantom, a ghost on the run. He was eventually tracked down to a DoubleTree hotel in Orange County. His 1996 Honda Accord a beacon that led the police to his door. When they found him, he was a man with no job, no car, and only $500 in cash, stolen from his dead brother's wallet. He was taken in for questioning, the net of justice slowly closing around him. The interrogation was a marathon, a grueling 8-hour ordeal in which Grant was confronted with the brutal reality of his actions. He offered a series of conflicting stories, his lies a desperate attempt to weave a web of innocence around himself. He claimed he had seen police and news vans outside his house, but had been too afraid to go home. So he had gone to a Panera Bread and searched for top news stories instead. He never once denied killing his family, a tacit admission that did not go unnoticed by the detectives. At one point, they showed him photos of the crime scene, of his dead parents and brother. He made a show of crying, but the detectives saw through the performance. There were no real tears, only the hollow sobs of a man who had lost his soul. The evidence against him was mounting. His internet search history revealed incriminating phrases like, "how to make a look-like." Blood evidence was found on his clothing, and gunpowder residue was on his hands. He was the last known person to be with the victims, and surveillance footage showed him purchasing ammunition and cleaning supplies before the murders. Even after the killings, he had continued to message Sylvie from his hotel room, his obsession so all-consuming that it had blinded him to the horror of what he had done. At the end of the interrogation, his older brother, Jason, was brought in to speak with him. Jason, his face a mask of grief and disbelief, pleaded with his brother to confess, to give their family some semblance of closure. But Grant was unwavering, his claims of innocence a mantra he repeated until the very end. But it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming. Grant Amato was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. The trial began on July 15, 2019, a somber affair that captivated the nation. The prosecution laid out its case with meticulous detail, painting a picture of a young man so consumed by a digital fantasy that he was willing to murder his own family to protect it. They presented the timeline of the murders, pieced together from cell phone records and activity on Margaret's laptop. They detailed the financial motive, the $200,000 Grant had stolen to fund his obsession with Sylvie. He lost his job, he became depressed, has a contentious relationship with his father and his brother, Assistant State Attorney Dominic Leo told the jury. He finds Sylvie and becomes consumed by her. The defense, led by Public Defender Jeff Dowdy, argued that the state had no physical evidence directly linking Grant to the murders. They questioned the integrity of the crime scene investigation, suggesting that detectives could have done more to process the home on the first day the bodies were found. They pointed out that Grant had been initially released after his interrogation, arguing that if the police had enough evidence, they would have arrested him then and there. The most heart-wrenching moment of the trial came when Jason Amato took the stand to testify against his own brother. His voice, thick with emotion, filled the courtroom as he recounted the story of his family's love and his brother's betrayal. The jury listened intently, their faces grim. They deliberated for just 8 hours before returning with a verdict, guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. The penalty phase of the trial began on August 12th. The state sought the death penalty, but the jury could not reach a unanimous decision. One juror held out, and as a result, Grant was automatically sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When asked if he felt any remorse for his actions, his response was chilling. "My family has been blaming me for months for ruining their lives, stealing, and not following the rules of the home," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "So I might as well be blamed for this too." Grant Amato is now an inmate at the Tomoka Correctional Institution in Daytona Beach, a world away from the comfortable suburban life he destroyed. He will spend the rest of his days behind bars, a prisoner of his own making. The woman for whom he sacrificed everything, the digital phantom named Sylvie, never visited him, never even came to the United States. It's unclear if she was even aware of the carnage that her online admirer had wrought in her name. Even in prison, Grant's story continued to take bizarre and disturbing turns. In 2025, it was revealed that he had been exchanging romantic text messages with Victoria Goodwin, the wife of star Aaron Goodwin. The messages, sent from a smuggled phone, detailed an alleged plot to hire a hitman to murder her husband. The revelation led to divorce proceedings for the Goodwins and raised the possibility of additional charges for Amato, though it's unclear what more could be done to a man already serving a life sentence. The Amato family murder case is a modern tragedy, a cautionary tale about the dangers of loneliness, obsession, and the dark corners of the internet. It is a story of a family's love and a son's betrayal. He claimed he had shot his family in the back of the head as an act of mercy, so they wouldn't know it was him who was pulling the trigger. It was a statement so cold, so devoid of humanity, that it sent a shiver down the spine of even the most seasoned law enforcement professionals. The Amato family is gone, their lives cut short by a son who chose a fantasy over his own flesh and blood, a son who, in the end, was the only one left to blame. Story 7. The small, unassuming house on 3rd Street in West Palm Beach was a place of complicated love, a home where two families had merged into one, their lives intertwined in a delicate, makeshift dance. It was the week after Christmas 2017, a time when the echoes of holiday cheer should have still been lingering in the air. Instead, a quiet tension hummed just beneath the surface, a low-frequency current of discord that was about to erupt into an act of unimaginable violence. The matriarch of this blended family was Robin Denson. She lived in the house with her girlfriend, 36-year-old Kalada Kala Crowell, a woman remembered for her sweet nature and a generosity so profound she would, as her girlfriend said, give the shirt off her back to help anybody. Kala's daughter, 11-year-old Kyra Inglet, was the heart of her world, a spunky, artistic girl on the cusp of adolescence. Sharing the crowded home were Robin's 4 adult sons, Parais Patrick Cordarius and 26-year-old Marlon Larice Joseph. Adding to the bustling household were Robin's goddaughter, Jeshima Tarver, and Marlon's own 8-year-old daughter, Camar Canty, who was visiting for the holidays. In this house of mothers and daughters, brothers and lovers, the fault lines had begun to appear, centered on the 2 young girls, Kyra and Camar. It was the kind of petty childhood friction that erupts in any home where children are thrown together. But Marlon Joseph, a man with a history of mental illness and a simmering rage he struggled to contain, saw it as something more sinister. He perceived his daughter as a victim, and Kyra as her tormentor. The first tremor of the coming earthquake occurred on December 23rd, just 2 days before Christmas. Jeshima Tarver, the goddaughter, overheard Marlon yelling to his mother, his voice sharp with anger. He was talking about Kyra. "She has one more time to make me mad or to bother. She needs to leave my daughter alone," he warned. It was a chilling ultimatum, a line drawn in the sand. "One more chance," he had declared, a threat that hung in the air, its full weight not yet understood. Shortly after making this vow, Marlon Joseph acquired a gun. The final chance came, and went on the afternoon of December 28th. It was an incident so trivial, it would have been forgotten in any other circumstance. Camar, complaining of a sore back, asked Kyra and Jeshima to sit on her. A moment later, She yelped that they were hurting her. Kyra, tangled up with the other girls, had trouble getting off quickly. That was it. A clumsy, childish game. But when Marlon learned of it later that evening, the trivial act was magnified through the distorted lens of his paranoia. It was the one more time he had been waiting for. That evening, Robin Denson returned home from work, her sons Parais and Patrick having picked her up. She went grocery shopping, and when she arrived at the house, the scene was one of domestic tranquility. Marlon helped bring in the groceries, then retreated to the room he shared with his brother Patrick, where he sat quietly reading his book. In the living room, Kyra, Kamar, and Jeshima were on the couch, laughing and talking, engrossed in their phones. Kala was in her bedroom, folding clothes. The peace was deceptive. A text message had been sent from Kala to Robin, the contents of which prompted a conversation between Robin and Marlon in the living room area. The discussion quickly turned to Kamare's mother, with Marlon growing agitated and using expletives. Robin, concerned about the children overhearing, told him to calm down. She then went outside to the porch, where her other sons, Parais and Cordarius, were waiting. The house was quieter now. Jeshima went to take a shower. It was then that the simmering tension finally exploded. From behind the closed bathroom door, Jeshima heard Marlon and Kala arguing. Marlon's voice was loud, accusatory. "Why is your daughter, Kyra, being mean to my daughter, Kamar?" he demanded. "She didn't do anything wrong." The argument escalated, and then the first loud bangs echoed through the house. 3 of them, sharp and deafening. They were followed by Kala's screams, a sound of pure terror and agony, her voice begging for someone to call 911. Then another bang. Jeshima, terrified, opened the bathroom door. Kamar, her eyes wide with horror, told her what had happened. Kala and Kyra had been shot. The floor was slick with blood. Kala was lying face down, motionless. Jeshima and Kamar ran into Kyra's room, hiding under the bed, where the little girl, using her father's phone, dialed 911. Outside on the porch, Parais had heard the gunshots. He saw Kyra burst out of the front door, running for her life, her eyes looking backward in terror. A moment later, Marlon emerged, a gun in his hand, in hot pursuit of the fleeing child. Parais, acting on pure instinct, tackled his brother, trying desperately to wrestle the gun away from him. He failed. Marlon scrambled to his feet and ran back inside the house. In front of the house, Robin and Cordarius had also heard the shots. They saw Kyra run out of the house and collapse on the walkway. Cordarius screamed at his mother to run. She fell to the ground in a neighbor's yard, paralyzed by a fear so profound she couldn't move. Inside the house, the slaughter was not yet complete. Marlon, having re-entered the home, stood over the bleeding, pleading body of Kala Crowell. As she begged for her life, he shot her twice in the head, executing her with a cold and brutal finality. He then turned his attention back to the 11-year-old girl who had witnessed her mother's murder. Kyra was outside, wounded but still alive. Marlon Joseph ran out of the house, chased down the terrified child, and shot her 5 times, 3 of those bullets striking her in the head. The execution-style murder was complete. Marlon ran back into the house one last time, grabbed the keys to Kala's car and fled, leaving behind a scene of carnage and a family destroyed by his rage. When the first police officers arrived, the scene was one of unimaginable horror. Kyra Inglet was on the sidewalk, a catastrophic gunshot wound to her head. She was still breathing, but unresponsive. Inside, they found the lifeless body of her mother, Kalada Crowell. Paramedics rushed Kyra to the hospital, but her injuries were too severe. She died hours later, never having regained consciousness. The medical examiner would later testify that Kala had been shot 6 times, including a defensive wound to her hand and the final, fatal shots to her head. Kyra had been shot 4 times, in the buttock, lower back, and twice in the head. The state's firearms expert determined that all 9 spent shell casings found at the scene, 5 outside and 4 inside, had been fired from the same, unrecovered weapon. Marlon Joseph was gone. He was the only person not at the scene when police arrived, a ghost who had vanished into the Florida night. A massive manhunt was launched. For 5 agonizing days, he remained at large, hiding out in an apartment in nearby Lake Worth. His mother, her heart broken by the loss of her partner and the monstrous actions of her son, made a public plea for him to turn himself in. He did not. On January 2nd, 2018, U.S. Marshals tracked him down and arrested him. He did not come willingly. The legal proceedings that followed were marked by a tragic and frustrating series of recantations. On the night of the murders, Marlon's brothers, Paris and Cordarius, had given sworn statements to the police, both identifying Marlon as the shooter. But when the case went to trial in February 2020, their stories changed. On the witness stand, they, along with their mother, claimed they could no longer remember the key details of that night. It was a transparent, heartbreaking attempt to protect their own, but it did not stop the wheels of justice. The prosecution was able to introduce the brothers' original, out-of-court identifications through the testimony of the lead detective, Paul Creelman, who recounted for the jury what they had told him in the raw, immediate aftermath of the killings. On February 24, 2020, after deliberating, a jury found Marlon Joseph guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The penalty phase began immediately. The jury heard evidence of Joseph's prior conviction for battery on a child and considered the aggravating factors presented by the state. For the murder of Kala Crowell, they found 4. Joseph was on felony probation at the time of the crime. He had a prior conviction for a violent felony. The murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, HAC, and it was committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated CCP manner. For the murder of 11-year-old Kyra, they found a 5th aggravator. The victim was a person less than 12 years of age. On February 26, 2020, the jury rendered its unanimous verdict, recommending that Marlon Joseph be sentenced to death for both murders. Before the final sentencing, the court held a hearing where the victim's family had a chance to speak. Kenneth Crowell, Kala's father and Kyra's grandfather, took the stand. He spoke of his daughter's dimpled smile and contagious laugh, of his smart, happy granddaughter. Then, he turned his gaze directly to the man who had stolen them from him. "Those bullets you fired, Mr. Marlon. Look at me. I wish you would look at me," he commanded. "Those bullets are still moving. They didn't stop in the bodies of our own children. You destroyed multiple lives, even those in your own family." He paused, his voice thick with a grief that had curdled into righteous anger. "Why?" he asked, his voice rising. "Why? You deserve nothing less than what is coming your way." On November 19, 2020, Circuit Judge Cheryl Caracuzzo handed down the final sentence. She followed the jury's recommendation, sentencing Marlon Joseph to death. In doing so, she made him the first person to be sent to death row from Palm Beach County in 18 years. Her words to him were chilling and direct. "Marlon Joseph, you have not only forfeited your right to live among us," she said, "but under the law of the state of Florida, you have forfeited your right to live at all." Joseph's case, like all death penalty cases, entered the long and complex appeals process. His lawyers argued that his trial was flawed, that the killings, while undeniably horrific, did not meet Florida's stringent legal test for a death sentence. But in February 2022, the Florida Supreme Court affirmed both his convictions and his death sentences. Marlon Joseph remains on death row at the Union Correctional Institution in Rayford, awaiting an execution that may be years away. The story he leaves behind is a tragic tapestry of domestic strife, mental illness, and a petty squabble between children that, in the hands of a man with a gun and a heart full of rage, became the catalyst for a massacre. It is a story of a mother and daughter executed in their own home, their lives extinguished in a hail of bullets fired by a man who was, in the most complicated and heartbreaking way, a member of their own family. Story 8. In the sun-drenched suburbs of Brisbane, where eucalyptus trees swayed gently against the backdrop of rolling hills and the distant hum of city life blended with the calls of native birds, Allison June Dickey was born on July 1, 1968. She grew up in a modest home in Ipswich, the the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names and Sunday barbecues were a weekly ritual. Her childhood filled with the simple joys of playing in the backyard and dreaming under the vast Australian sky. Allison was a bright spark from the start, her curiosity driving her to excel in school, where teachers praised her quick mind and warm spirit that drew friends like moths to a flame. By her teenage years, she had discovered her passion for ballet, her lithe form gliding across stages in local productions, her performances capturing the grace and poise that would define much of her life. Crowned Miss Brisbane in 1993, she shone not just for her beauty, but for her intelligence, speaking 6 languages fluently and harboring ambitions that reached far beyond the provincial limits of her hometown. University beckoned, and Allison pursued her studies with the same determination that fueled her dance steps, graduating with honors and entering the world of business with a role at Flight Center, a travel agency where her charm and efficiency made her indispensable. It was there, amid the bustle of booking flights and dreaming of far-off places, that she met Gerard Robert Baden-Clay in 1996, a young man with an air of quiet confidence and a lineage that traced back to Robert Baden-Powell, the founder of the Scout movement. Gerard, born in 1970 in Bournemouth, England, had a peripatetic upbringing, his family migrating from Zambia to Rhodesia in 1971, changing their name to Baden-Clay to honor his great-grandfather, before settling in Australia in 1980. Trained as an accountant, he too worked at Flight Center, and their shared professional world sparked an immediate connection, conversations about travel turning into late-night talks about futures intertwined. Their romance blossomed quickly, a whirlwind of dates along the Brisbane River and promises whispered under starlit skies, leading to their marriage on August 23, 1997. To the outside world, they were the picture of young love, Allison with her radiant smile and Gerard with his steady gaze, both ambitious and full of plans for a family. They settled into a comfortable rhythm, Allison advancing in her career while Gerard ventured into real estate, opening an upmarket franchise in 2000 for that initially thrived on the booming Queensland market. Their first daughter arrived in 2001, followed by a second in 2003 and a third in 2006, the girls filling their home with laughter and the patter of small feet, a family portrait that seemed idyllic. By 2012, they lived in a rented house in affluent Brookfield, a leafy suburb where the air smelled of fresh-cut grass and barbecues, Allison balancing her executive role at Flight Center with motherhood, her days a delicate dance of school runs and spreadsheets. But beneath the surface polish, fissures began to form, subtle at first like cracks in fine china. Gerard's business, once a success, faltered under the weight of the 2011 Brisbane floods, debts mounting as properties sat unsold and the real estate market soured. Allison, ever the pillar, supported the family financially, her steady income a lifeline, but Gerard's pride chafed at the reversal, his frustrations simmering in quiet evenings when conversations turned tense. He began to withdraw, his charm reserved for clients while at home he became controlling, dictating finances with an iron grip and isolating Allison from her closest friends, her once vibrant social circle shrinking to echoes. Whispers of infidelity surfaced, Gerard entangled in affairs with colleagues, his absences explained away as late nights at the office. But Allison, devoted to her daughters, chose to believe in reconciliation, pouring her energy into family counseling sessions that promised mending. In October 2011, the truth shattered her illusions when she discovered Gerard's ongoing affair with Toni McHugh, a woman from his real estate office, a betrayal that cut deep into her trust. The revelation plunged Allison into turmoil, her nights filled with tears and questions, her days a mask of composure for the children's sake. She confronted him, demanding honesty, but Gerard deflected, promising it was over while secretly continuing the liaison, his texts to Toni laced with declarations of love and plans for a future together. Allison, tormented by self-doubt, began to question her worth, Gerard's words eroding her confidence, comments on her appearance, her role as a mother, her contributions to the home, all designed to keep her off balance. Despite the pain, she clung to the marriage, enrolling in counseling where a plan was devised. Brief sessions every other day for her to voice her hurt, Gerard agreeing reluctantly, his participation a performance rather than penance. As April 2012 approached, the pressure built like storm clouds over the Glass House Mountains. Gerard's financial woes deepened, the business teetering on collapse, creditors circling while he eyed Allison's life insurance policy, worth over $800,000, a grim temptation in his desperation. Allison, unaware, focused on an upcoming work conference in Brisbane, her excitement a brief light in the gloom, but Gerard dreaded the encounter. Tony was attending the same event, and the risk of exposure loomed large. On April 19th, the day before her disappearance, the counseling session turned interrogative, Allison pressing for details of the affair, her voice rising in the quiet home as the girls slept upstairs. Tensions peaked that evening, Gerard's resentment boiling over after Allison challenged his lies once more, the argument spilling into the night, words sharp as knives in the dim light of their bedroom. In the heat of the confrontation, Gerard's control snapped, his hands finding Allison's throat in a violent struggle that ended her life, her fingernails raking his face in a desperate bid for survival. Panic seized him as her body went limp, the reality of what he'd done crashing down like the floods that had nearly ruined him. With the children asleep, he acted swiftly, wrapping her body and dragging it through the backyard, leaves from their garden clinging to her hair, before placing her in the rear of their newly purchased SUV, blood traces marking the journey. He drove through the dark to Colo Creek in Anstead, 13 kilometers away, dumping her body on the muddy bank under the bridge, the rushing water an indifferent witness to his crime. Returning home before dawn, he cleaned the evidence as best he could, rehearsing his story. Allison had gone for an early morning walk, a habit he invented to cover the absence. The next morning, April 20th, dawned crisp and ordinary, the Brookfield streets stirring as Gerard dialed 000 at 7:14 a.m., his voice laced with feigned concern as he reported Allison missing. "She sometimes walks early, but she's always back for the girls' breakfast," he told the operator, his words carefully chosen to evoke sympathy. Police arrived promptly, Constables Ash and Hammond noting the fresh scratches on his right cheek. 3 parallel lines that he dismissed as shaving nicks from a new razor, his explanation delivered with practiced ease. The house was declared a crime scene, officers combing the rooms while Gerard comforted his daughters, their confusion mounting as Mommy's absence stretched into hours. He appeared on television that day, his face drawn, appealing for information. "If anyone has seen Allison, please come forward," he urged, the public hanging on his every word, unaware of the deception. The search mobilized Brisbane like a living organism, volunteers swelling the ranks of police and SES teams, helicopters thumping overhead as they scoured forests, dams, and mine shafts in the MT Crosby area. Nearly 400 people participated on the first full day, the community rallying around the image of a devoted mother vanished without trace, posters of Allison, smiling, vibrant, plastered across lampposts and newsstands. Gerard joined the efforts, his presence at the search center a show of solidarity, but suspicions flickered. Why no signs of a walk, no sightings from neighbors who usually saw her routine? Whispers grew about his demeanor, too composed, too quick to speak of her in the past tense. And questions about his business surfaced, debts revealed, affairs hinted at in anonymous tips. Allison's family, her parents Jeff and Priscilla Dickey, arrived from Ipswich, their grief palpable, hugging the girls while eyeing Gerard with quiet doubt. Days blurred into a tense vigil, the wall of flowers and cards at the Baden clay fence growing taller, messages of hope mingling with prayers for Allison's return. Media coverage intensified, pleas drawing national attention, but cracks appeared. Phone records showed no early calls from Allison, and a neighbor recalled hearing a woman's scream and a car engine late on April 19th. On April 30th, 10 days after her disappearance, a canoeist spotted a body snagged on the bank of Colo Creek, the water lapping at her remains, leaves from Brookfield's camphor laurel trees tangled in her hair. Confirmation came swiftly, Allison, 43, her form bloated by immersion, the autopsy inconclusive on cause of death, but noting no obvious injuries, only the subtle signs of struggle. Petechiae in her eyes suggesting asphyxiation. The news devastated the community, Gerard's composure cracking as he identified her at the morgue, but police scrutiny sharpened. Blood specks in the SUV's boot, microscopic but damning, linked to Allison. Leaf debris on her clothing matched the backyard, not the creek site. Gerard was arrested on June 13, 2012 at Indooroopilly Station, charged with murder and interfering with a corpse, his denials fervent. "I'm innocent, I'll fight this." Bail was denied, Justice Bottas citing flight risk. Gerard remanded as the girls were placed with Allison's parents, their world upended. Investigations deepened. Gerard's affair with Tony confirmed via texts, his financial desperation exposed. $300,000 in debts, inquiries to insurers post-discovery. The scratches? Forensic experts debunked the razor story, concluding fingernail marks from a close-quarters fight. The trial commenced on June 10, 2014, in Brisbane Supreme Court. Justice Brendan D. SCF airs on the bench, the public gallery packed with Allison's supporters, the air thick with anticipation. Gerard pleaded not guilty, his defense claiming accident, a fall during argument, no intent to kill, but the Crown painted a portrait of motive. A fair exposure, financial gain, a man unmasked. Witnesses testified, the counselor recounting Allison's torment, Tony's lover's triangle, colleagues on Gerard's charm masking deceit. Phone data contradicted his timeline, no walk evidence emerged, and the jury, after deliberation, returned on July 15th, guilty of murder. Sentenced to life with 15 years non-parole, Gerard showed no emotion, but Allison's family exhaled, Jeff Dickey stating, "Justice for our girl." Appeals followed, Gerard's team arguing insufficient evidence of intent. The Queensland Court of Appeal downgrading to manslaughter on December 8, 2015, citing possible non-lethal confrontation. Public outrage erupted, demanding high court intervention, the case symbolizing failures in domestic violence recognition. The prosecution appealed, and on August 31, 2016, the High Court reinstated the murder conviction, their ruling. The original evidence proved premeditation beyond doubt. Gerard, now in Woolston Correctional Center, faced the full weight, his daughters growing under their grandparents' care, Allison's legacy enduring. In the years since, the case's tension, the hidden betrayals, the frantic cover-up, the courtroom battles, resonates, a stark reminder of love's dark underbelly, the stakes of silence in abusive homes, and the profound human cost when control turns lethal. Allison's story, woven from grace and tragedy, immerses us in the quiet horrors behind closed doors, urging vigilance and change.